Alright, this is going to be the continuation of Chapter 4, Tissue Level Organization, or Part 2. And in this one, we're going to talk about connective tissue, and we're going to talk about classifying connective tissue proper, fluid connective tissue, and then supportive connective tissue. So connective tissue. Most diverse tissue of the body, bone, blood, fat, and familiar connective tissue that have a very different function and properties. Ground substance, which is going to be a new term in this, is a term for a non-cellular component of extracellular matrix which contains the fibers. The matrix itself, the extracellular compartment of animal tissue that usually provides structural support to the animal cells in addition to performing various other important functions. The extracellular matrix is a defining feature of connective tissue in animals. Functions of connective tissue are going to be supportive of protection. Minerals and fibers produced by connective tissues establish a bony structural framework for the body. Transportation of materials. Fluid and connective tissue provide an efficient means of moving dissolved materials. Storage of energy reserves. Fats are stored in connective tissue or adipose cells, and we can tap into fat for extra energy if need be. And defense of the body. Special connective tissue responds to invasions by microorganisms, and an example of this are going to be antibodies. So anaphylaxis is caused from an antigen-antibody reaction and an autoimmune response, which we'll get into more detail whenever we talk about the immune system. So functions of connective tissue. They support and protect. They transport materials, storage for energy reserves, and defense of the body. Classifying connective tissues. 2.2. Connective tissue proper consists of many types of cells and fibers with a matrix that contains a syrupy ground substance. And the syrupy ground substance is going to kind of be like filler. Fluid connective tissue have a distinctive population of cells suspended in a matrix of watery ground substance that contains dissolved proteins. And in case you're wondering what this is going to be the plasma that the blood kind of floats around. Supportive connective tissues have a less diverse cellular population than connective tissue proper, and a matrix of dense ground substance and closely packed fibers. And we get some pictures here coming up in just a second. We'll kind of talk about all these things again. Connective tissue proper. 2.3. Connective tissue proper contains a varied cell population, extracellular fibers, and a syrupy ground substance. So here we go. So in all of these we have connective tissues, and in connective tissue proper we have two different types. There are loose connective tissues and dense connective tissues. In fluid connective tissues, and pretty much the two types that we're thinking about here are going to be the blood, which transports oxygen, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, tons of stuff in the blood. So we have blood, and then we have lymph. And if we want to start thinking of lymph kind of as it's an easy way to allow the immune system to respond to things. It's the trash can, so to speak, of the body. And then we have supportive connective tissues, which are cartilage or bone. Cartilage, solid rubbery matrix, and this is going to allow us to cushion the bones from striking one another. And then bone itself, which we provide storage of calcium in the bone, kind of gives us support, solid crystalline matrix throughout the body. So all of our major organs is encapsulated or covered with some kind of a bony substance or surface. And I'll give you an example of this. Let's say your heart and lungs, pretty sensitive items, the brain, pretty sensitive items. All of these are encased in bone. The brain's in the skull, and the heart and lungs are inside the rib cage. Cell population. More terms. Fibroblasts are the most abundant cells in connective tissue proper. These permanent residents are responsible for producing and maintaining the connective tissue fibers and ground substance. Macrophages are scattered throughout the matrix and are big eater cells. So whenever we have things in the future that we call white blood cells, and these are going to be polymorphonucleated, which means they have multiple nucleuses. These white blood cells are actually going to perform macrophagic action, which means they're going to eat foreign substances or engulf them inside of their cellular material. Then we have fat cells. Adipose cells are permanent residents, and even in your subcutaneous layer, you have a store of fat cells that your body can easily tap into in case it needs an emergency source of energy. We have mast cells. They're small, mobile connective tissue cells, often found near blood vessels, and they're packed with chemicals for defense. Now, a mast cell is filled with tons and tons of histamine. So it has these granules of heparin and histamine inside these mast cells. Now, with this said, let's say that we have, pardon, let's say that we have an allergy response. The antigen antibody reaction occurs, and to keep it in one location, what we do is we do something called degranulation of a mast cell, and what that means is to release all the histamine and heparin. And what this histamine and heparin does is it keeps the foreign substance that triggered the immune system in one location. It does this by causing the vessels to vasodilate or get bigger. Now what that does is that loses the pressure in that area so that the substance can't hop on something and it's gone. So degranulation of mast cells is pretty important as far as the immune system goes. And we'll talk about an adjustment of this and alterations of this in the future. Antibodies, which are in cellular populations, proteins that destroy invading microorganisms or foreign substances. And an antibody is kind of like a target. If we have an antibody on something and we have an antigen-antibody reaction, we can easily activate our immune system to whether it be short-term or cellular-mediated response, or even the long-term section to where we have something already made to fix this foreign invader. Connective tissue fibers. We have collagen fibers. They're long, straight, and unbranched. These strong but flexible fibers are the most common fibers in connective tissue proper. Collagen fibers. Elastic fibers contains the protein elastin. They are branched and wavy, and after stretching will return to their original length. Then we have reticular fibers. Least common of the three, are thinner than collagen fibers and commonly form a branching interwoven framework in various organs. And these things kind of give structural support to some of the organs. So the elastic fibers, we're going to see these more proteins that stretch back to the original, and then collagen fibers, long, straight, and unbranched. Collagen is in our skin. It's anything that's movable on the exterior epithelium of our body will have collagen in it. Ground substance. Ground substance fills the spaces between cells and surrounds the connective tissue fiber. So this is kind of like if I got a cell with all my little parts in it. Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum. Right. Then we have all this cellular structure in there. All the stuff that's in between is considered ground substance. So it's loaded with proteins, it's loaded with extra substances. So ground substance pretty much fills up the spaces between the cells. Clinical note, Marfan syndrome. It's a genetical disorder of connective tissue. People with Marfan's tend to be unusually tall and long limbs and thin fingers. May cause aneurysms, and the reason is Marfan syndrome causes elongation of connective tissue. Now your blood vessels are also connective tissue, so if it thins out, your aorta has the possibility of making an aneurysm or bursting. Now the way that they tell that you have Marfan syndrome is if your hands, from fingertip to fingertip, is longer than you are tall. In most people, fingertip to fingertip is the same distance that you are from the ground, or that's how tall you are. So people with Marfan's have a different ratio. Their fingertip to fingertip is a lot longer than they are tall. Clinical note, blunt chest trauma. Ligamented arteriosum, a small ligament attached to the superior surface of the pulmonary trunk and the anterior surface of the aortic arch. It is a non-functional vestige or leftover from the ductus arteriosus and is formed within 3 weeks of birth. Now, what this does is this can be a problem for us as far as having blood and chest trauma. The heart is here. We have the aorta, superior vena cava, ligamentous arteriosum kind of attaches these two. It used to be, whenever we were born, the venous ductus arteriosus, which allowed for collateral circulation from the arterial side to the venous side. So within 3 weeks, this turns into kind of a proper connective tissue or ligament that holds these two vascular structures in place. Problem with that is it's also attached to underlying structures beneath. So if you get a ton of trauma to the chest or a coup contre coup of the organs that are lying in there, you can pluck a hole in the aorta and cause this to bleed out. Generally speaking, more than 6 gravitational forces forward in stress or energy can cause you to pluck a hole in your aorta from this ligament. Clinical note, EMS and obesity. As far as EMS service providers, we ride around in trucks. There's not a lot of active aerobic workouts in our environment, so we get a lot of weight gain. And a lot of weight gain can easily lead to physical injury, and more commonly what occurs in EMS is back strain, back pain, or back injury. Keeping your body physically fit with a regular exercise is essential. Connective tissue proper. We have loose connective tissue. Loose connective tissue forms a layer that separates the skin from underlying muscles and provides both padding and a considerable amount of independent movement. Adipose tissue, or fat, is also loose connective tissue that contains a large number of fat cells, or adipocytes. Now, we can tap into that very easily. This is all of our subcutaneous layer in our body, in case we need an extra supply of energy. Dense connective tissue consists mostly of collagen fibers. They may also be called fibrous or collagenous, and examples of this are tendons and their cords of dense regular connective tissue. And these are cells and fibers of connective tissue proper. This is figure 4.8 in your book. Reticulating fibers here. Adipose cells, fat cells, easily be tapped into for energy. This macrophage is a white blood cell. This will eat things that are running amok. Mast cell, see all the granulations in here? This mast cell has histamine and heparin in it. Elastin fibers to provide structural support that's very elastic and snap back. We have collagen fibers here to provide internal structure for all of this. A fibroblast here. A blank cell, which is a stem cell here. And then a normal white blood cell. It looks like a monocyte. And then we have blood vessels kind of running in between here with carrying red blood cells and oxygen. And then all of this stuff that's everything else that's not isolated or not an identifying structure is considered ground substance. So this is ground substance, this is ground substance, ground substance, ground substance, ground substance. Alright, figure 4.9, connective tissue proper. So various locations that we can find this connective tissue. Example, respiratory tract, lung tissue. If you'll notice, this has collagen fibers in it, mast cells, a fat cell actually in the tissue itself, macrophage or white blood cell. So loose connective tissue would be in the lungs. Adipose tissue, and this is the surface of the skin. So this is a subcutaneous layer, and these are fat cells. This is a picture of them, and it's stained so that we see it on a microscope. And then we have dense connective tissue, and this is a tendon. A tendon would attach muscle to bone, and very dense collagen fibers in this dense connective tissue. So fluid connective tissue. We have blood, lymph, plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And we're going to talk about this in more detail whenever we actually get into the cardiovascular system. So blood, our connective tissue that contains a distinctive collection of cells in a fluid matrix. Lymph, is considered a part of the interstitial fluid and the fluid which lies in the interstices of all body tissues. And this is kind of like what we saw here in this, which is ground substance. If we talk about lymph and plasma, this would be the ground substance of the actual of the cells in the blood. Lymph lies in the interstitial fluids in all the body cavities. It's also an easy way to remove bacterial items, and it's attached very closely to the immune system. Plasma, watery matrix in the blood. And this, if you take a sample or a blood tube and you spin it down and remove all the red blood cells down at the bottom, the clear fluid that you get left over is actually plasma. Red blood cells. Half of the blood volume transport the oxygen, and like if you took a sample of blood and about 45% of it or about 50% of it would actually be red blood cells, and these actually transport our oxygen for our body. The white blood cells, you have about 10 to 12% of that blood sample that's going to be white blood cells, and this would constitute the immune system, or the ability of the body to provide a cellular media to attack foreign substances. And then platelets, which are cell fragments that function in blood clotting. So these are going to be like emergency patches in case we get a laceration or something. Platelets would bring about the common pathway and bring about the formation of a clot. So supportive connective tissue, cartilage, firm gel that contains embedded fibers, chondrocytes, chondrocytes, which are the only cells found within the matrix, live in small pockets known as lacunae. Chondrocytes are the only cells found in cartilage. They produce and maintain the cartilaginous matrix, which consists mainly of collagen. And we have various types of cartilage here. We have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most common type of cartilage. The matrix contains closely packed collagen fibers, which make hyaline cartilage tough but somewhat flexible. We have elastic cartilage, type of cartilage present in the outer ear, larynx, and epiglottis. It contains elastic fibers, network of collagen fibers, and the principal protein is elastin. Fibrocartilage consists of a mixture of white fibrous tissue and cartilaginous tissue of various proportions. Clinical note, hyaline cartilage that we described earlier is what the meniscus is made out of, and the meniscus is there to pretty much cushion the knee bones. So if you get a twisting fashion or an injury to the knee, you can sure tear your meniscus. And these are the locations. This is figure 4.10, types of cartilage. We have hyaline cartilage actually in our shoulder joint. An example of this, elastic cartilage, which is going to be in our ear. And then fibrocartilage, which is going to be the discs. Discs of our spine. 2.18, bone. Bone is the matrix of bone consists mainly of hard calcium compounds and flexible collagen fibers. We have osteocytes, which are in the lacunae of the bone, and canaliculi. They're microscopic canals between the various lacunae of ossified bone or hardened bone. The radiating process of the osteocytes projects into these canals, and we have a picture here in just a second. We'll show you this. And the periosteum. Periosteum is a membrane that lines the outer surface of all bones. And these are the canaliculi right here. These. Osteocytes. These little bitty tiny things are actually the bone cells. The osteocytes. In the middle, we have blood vessels in the central canal, and this is the matrix, the bone matrix, shown here. Now, this one over here is an actual cellular sample that's on a microscope, and this is a man-made version. So, canaliculi, here, and here, osteocytes, which are bone cells, blood vessels, central canal where the blood vessels run through, and then the actual bone matrix itself. We'll talk about this more in skeletal area or the bone chapter. 3.0 membranes. We have mucous membrane, serous, cutaneous, and synovial membranes. Mucous membranes. Mucous membranes are mucosa, lines cavities that communicate with the exterior, including digestive, respiratory, reproductive, urinary tracts. The epithelial surfaces are kept moist at all times, typically by mucus secretions or by exposure to fluids such as urine or semen. Mucous membranes. Our lungs are considered mucous membranes. You get them irritated, you produce mucus. Serous membranes. Serous membranes, liners of the sealed internal subdivisions of the ventral body cavity. So all the organs are going to have serous membranes. Pleura lines the pleural cavities and lines the lungs. Peritoneum lines the abdominal cavity. Pericardium lines the heart, and so on. Serous membranes. And then we have cutaneous membranes. Cutaneous membranes, or skin, covers the surface of the body. Cutaneous skin. And then we have synovial membranes. The synovial membranes, fibrous capsule that lines the joint cavity, and then articulations are the joints of the body, and we have many of them, variations. So examples of membranes, we have mucous membranes. The example that they give are the mucous membranes in the intestine, which is going to be here. Mucus secretion occurs here, epithelium, columnar, underneath supportive loose connective tissue. Serous membranes, which are going to be, this would be the peritoneal cavity. This is going to be simple epithelial, loose connective tissue at the bottom. Stratified epithelia. This one here is going to be cutaneous membranes, or your skin. And then loose connective tissue at the bottom has vessels in it in the loose connective tissue. The epithelia does not. And then last but not least, synovial membrane, or the joint. Hyaline cartilage, this would be the meniscus. This would be the synovial fluid in the joint to provide even more structure. And fat cells, adipocytes, synovial membrane. So again, membranes: mucous membrane, serous membrane, cutaneous membrane, and synovial membrane. Muscle tissue. We have skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Muscle tissue. Muscle cell contracts involves interaction between filaments of myosin and actin, which are proteins found in the cytoskeletons of many cells. And we're going to talk about this in detail in the muscle chapter. Skeletal muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue, actin and myosin filaments are arranged in an organized pattern. Skeletal muscle fibers appear to be marked by the series of bands known as striations. And then cardiac muscle tissue. Like skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue is striated, but each cardiac muscle cell is much smaller than the skeletal muscle fiber and usually has only a single nuclei. Smooth muscle tissue, which is another type of autonomic tissue here. Unlike skeletal and cardiac smooth muscle, the actin and myosin filaments in smooth muscle cells are scattered throughout the cytoplasm, so there are no striations. Smooth muscle cells can divide, so smooth muscle tissue can regenerate after injury. That is not the case in cardiac muscle tissue. They have not the ability to generate after injury. Smooth muscle and skeletal muscle does. And this is the picture. So if we looked at the skeletal muscle, this is striated here. Take a look at this. See how it's got all these little lines in it? And now we'll talk about cardiac muscle last. And then we have smooth muscle tissue, which don't have the striations in it. We just have these big old elongated cells. So what a cardiac cell is, this is autonomic, which means it's automatically run. And this up here we have somatic function over, so this is voluntary. We have the ability to move our skeletal muscle. So a cardiac muscle tissue is like a skeletal muscle cell and a smooth muscle cell gets together, and they both have an offspring. And the offspring is cardiac muscle tissue. Now it has some of the features of both. It has the ability to be run autonomically or automatically, but we can still adjust it and slow it down. So if you really concentrate and relax, you can slow your heart down, but you generally cannot stop it. Neural tissue. Neural tissue, which is known as nervous system tissue, is specialized for the conduction of electrical impulses from one region of the body to the other. The neuron has three parts, and this is important, and we're going to talk about this more in the neural chapter. It has a cell body, it has dendrites, and it has an axonal end. And then the supportive cells, or like the pit crew for the neurons, are called neuroglia. So in the brain, this is what all these cells are made off of. This is the nucleus. This is the cell body, right here. These all are dendrites, and these will allow communication from one cell body to the next. And then this is the business end, the axonal end. So the dendrites are generally very small, but the axons can be very, very long, elongated, and large. The one to the left is the man-made picture, and the one to the right is the actual photomicrograph of a neuron cell. And this is what all the brain tissue is made from, neuronal tissue. Tissue injuries and repair. We have inflammation and fibrosis here, a couple terms. Inflammation produces several familiar indications, including swelling, warmth, redness, and pain. Inflammation can also result from an infection, which is in the presence of pathogens. So something that's disease, staph, strep, tetanus, which is done by the bacteria Clostridium. It's an exotoxin. All of these can cause inflammation and swelling and pain. Fibrosis is the formation of excessive fibrous connective tissue in an organ or tissue in reparative or reactive process. Example of this would be a very fibrous tissue that did not function as well as it previously did, and this was from the repair or the scar formation in the actual tissue that's being repaired. Tissue and aging. Everything does not work as well as the older that you get. Aging and cancer incidence. 25% of all Americans pretty much develop some sort of cancer, and 70–80% of the cancer cases result from chemical exposure, environmental factors, or some combination of the two. And 40% of these cancers are caused by cigarette smoke. These are just statistical information that's in your book. This also is the last slide in this section, or part 2. So if you have any questions over part 1 or part 2 of chapter 4, please feel free to call me 405-219-7613 or email me at smithor@imsa.net. Thank you.